Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to talk to you guys about one of my favorite exercises, and an exercise that can actually correct a lot of your muscle imbalances and weak points in your upper body, and that's the chin-up. So let me put on my +5 out of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about that. And for those unfamiliar with that, that's a gaming reference. All my gamers out there get that. But let's talk about the chin-up, and when I say the chin-up, I'm talking about hanging from a bar, palms facing you, chinning up. Okay, not necessarily an overhand grip. That's called a pull-up, and pull-ups are fantastic exercises also, but we are specifically talking about the chin-up here because it does have some benefits because of the extra bicep involvement with it for bringing up your total upper body, and the fact that you can do more workload with it because the biceps are added in. Now, I have entire videos discussing that part. I'm not really going to cover that here. But when you think about it, what are some of the most common weaknesses that people have in their upper body? People who do a lot of training, when you think about it visually, aesthetically, and the thing that we need to understand, classic aesthetics, you know where that comes from? Obviously, people's genetics and structure matter, but it's having a well-developed musculature means you're probably strong and athletic, because people who have weak links or have a really underdeveloped muscle or two somewhere in their upper body and they don't have overall proportionate balance probably have weak links in their performance and strength as well. And that's where those classic looks come from, because that was the look of athletes. That was the look of athletes of even the ancient Greeks and things. And so that's where that classic shape and structure comes from. And it should make sense when you think about it. It makes sense when you really do think about it. Now, what do you see most common these days? What are people's most common weak links in their upper body that people have to go back and do extra work to correct? Usually upper chest, right? Rear delts, the long head of the tricep. Those are oftentimes the areas of the upper body that get underdeveloped, and the reason for that is that people tend to put a lot of focus on things like the bench press. Heavy focus on the bench press. Well, the heavy focus on the bench press tends to cause certain muscles to get disproportionate. Tends to make the whole lower part of the pec get a little more developed than the upper pec. It makes the lateral and medial head of the triceps sometimes get overdeveloped compared to the long head. And it tends to cause the whole anterior side of the shoulder girdle to get more developed than the posterior side. Now, some people are saying, well, what does that have to do with chin-ups? Chin-ups are a latissimus dorsi and bicep exercise, aren't they? Yeah, they are. In fact, chin-ups are quite possibly not necessarily the best, because best is really a relative term, but there is no exercise that we have any research on that I'm aware of that can surpass the lat development that you can get from chin-ups and the bicep development that you can get from chin-ups. In other words, it's tied for the best exercise with several other exercises for developing those two areas of the body. There's nothing that surpasses it. In other words, a person could reach their peak potential lat development and their peak potential bicep development by doing nothing but getting really, really good at chin-ups and doing a lot of work with them. Any expert will agree with that, any physiology expert. I'm not saying you can't do other supplemental work. I'm not saying you can't do other exercises, but they will maximize development of those two muscles. They absolutely will. But that's not where they stop. Chin-ups and lat pull-downs and things like that get confused. Chin-ups engage a lot of other muscles that people don't think about. Now, what's the biggest reason you usually see anterior deltoid dominance over the posterior deltoid? Because that's a big one. It's not because people aren't necessarily training their rear delts and they're doing isolation work with their front delts. Most people don't isolate front delts. That they put a massive amount of focus on pressing and not enough focus on pulling. Now, if you come in and you get really strong at weighted chin-ups and you do lots of them, they are going to stimulate your rear delts. If you put as much focus on the chin-up as you did on various chest presses and overhead presses, the rear delt will actually catch the front delt in terms of overall muscle balance. The reason you see weak rear delts is because people just don't focus on pulling as much, pulling with their upper back at least. They may be with a deadlift or something. They just don't focus on it as much as they do their pushing. And accordingly, that's what causes it. Now, those people also tend to have lagging lats also. But people who do massive amounts of pulling work probably don't need much in the way of additional rear delt work. And if they do, something like face pulls can sort that out, which have their own benefits. So the chin-ups themselves, just if you focus heavily on them, will go ahead and bring the rear delt up. Obviously, it will bring your lats and biceps up. Now, incidentally, this exercise works other muscles to some extent. And when I say works them, meaning when we put EMGs on people, these areas light up with activity. And it's things that people don't think of. And part of it is going to be, one of them is the long head of the tricep, the biggest head. Now, why is that important? And that, by the way, that only counts if you go all the way down. If you go all the way down to the bottom and you get that stretch at the bottom, it's that stretch that gets a stretch in the long head of the tricep. And then when you start out of the bottom from a dead hang, you go all the way down and you stretch that muscle, it actually does help start the exercise. And when we look at it on EMGs, that head of the muscle lights up. It lights up pretty good. It's actually a relatively strong contraction. Well, that matters because most presses and the way most people perform tricep extensions don't work this head very much. And it's also the biggest of the three heads of the tricep, because you have the lateral head, you have the medial head, which is the smallest, and then you have the long head up here. Well, that's your whole upper half of your tricep. And that head actually has more total muscle fibers in it than the other two heads combined. It's the biggest head. It makes up something like 55-60% of the actual muscle fibers in the tricep. It gets underworked because part of that muscle is designed to do a stretch like this. Most people aren't doing tricep extensions to where they come up and stretch it. They're stopping at their base. Most chest presses, because again, if you think about what's going on there, it's working these heads more. And I'm not saying this head doesn't get worked by these things, but it's a disproportionate workload. Chin-ups, that's really the only head of the tricep they work. So the head that gets neglected the most with your pressing and tricep work, depending upon what you do, some people do tons of tricep work that develops this head, and that's fine. But we're not talking about those people. We're talking about the people who are neglecting it, which is the majority. There are people who come in and do 3 or 4 different sorts of triceps extensions every workout, and they still don't hit that head correctly. They still actually just focus on the same heads that get worked on the bench press. It's basically, you look at them and go, why don't you just close grip bench press more? Then all those tricep extensions would give you more benefits. But they are really working the same heads. The chin-up can help bring that up, especially if you do a lot of chin-ups, especially if you do them from a dead hang. You go all the way down and stretch at the bottom. It can help correct that. So we now have 2 of the most common smaller muscle weaknesses. The chin-ups can help alleviate that. Now, what about upper chest? A lot of people aren't aware of that. The chin-up actually works your upper chest. And if you don't believe me, go start doing chin-ups and do a bunch of chin-ups. Do a set of chin-ups to failure if you haven't done any in a while. And then note where you feel soreness and stuff later. Your upper chest will usually feel this whole outer edge up here. You'll feel it all the way across. And usually all up here. You're going to feel soreness there. You'll actually notice if you do relatively high rep chin-ups, you'll get a little bit of a pump there. If you stop and feel where you're feeling these things. Well, what do we see in EMG studies? The upper chest lights up on chin-ups. It lights up on chin-ups. Also, the chin-up tends to, when we've done studies also, it works the abdominals just as much as a crunch does. So when you step back and think about that, think about the different parts of your upper body that tend to sometimes lag, and think about what the chin-up works, and you realize, wait a minute, it builds already. It's known to be one of the best lat and bicep exercises. It works the mid-traps, the upper, works the entire trapezius. It works a lot of the other support muscles through the back very effectively, maybe not as good as a deadlift, but it still works them, and it's still cumulative. It still adds up. It works the rear delts, works the long head of the tricep, and it works the upper chest. In other words, if you did tons and tons of chin-ups, what muscles do you have left that aren't being worked? What, maybe the side delt, but there's a radiant effect from that. It actually gives a little bit of stimulation to the side delt, just not much. Maybe your side delts, your lower chest, these 2 heads of your tricep. I mean, when you think about it, there's only about 3 muscles, 3, 4, 5 heads, about 5 total heads of muscles in your entire upper body that the chin-up doesn't actually stimulate muscle growth in. That's not very many, but the thing is, every one of those could be hit with 1 to 2 exercises. In other words, the chin-up itself can cause well over half of the muscles in your upper body to grow and grow significantly. Over 50%, that one exercise probably works 60 to 70% of the muscles in your entire upper body. And a bunch of them are ones that are common weak points that just don't get quite enough stimulation for a lot of people, in addition to the fact that it's just overall a good athletic exercise. So that's one thing that people need to consider. If you're struggling with which is overall development and size in your upper body, and you're not doing chin-ups and you're not focusing on getting strong on chin-ups, you should probably consider adding them into your routine. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.